First, I will analyze the JonBenet Ramsey ransom note. The first point of interest is who the letter is addressed to. The kidnappers addressed the letter to John Ramsey, not because of some secret vendetta or because they were a sadistic pedophile, but simply because he is the one who makes the money. Why would they address it to anyone else when he is the one that can get them the cash? The second item to point out is the first two words of the second line. They say, listen carefully. They do not say, read this carefully or read these words carefully, but say, listen carefully. That may be an indication that this note was originally intended to be read over the phone. The kidnappers were supposed to be kidnapping JonBenet and taking her to an undisclosed location. They would then hide her and call the Ramseys the day after Christmas to arrange for a pickup of the ransom money. However, you already know this if you watched the matriarch murderess video. She irrationally hit JonBenet over the head with a flashlight and thought she had killed her. Therefore, she decided to leave JonBenet's body in the basement and still carry on with her plan to get that ransom money at all costs. We respect your business, but not the country it serves, was just an attempt to make themselves seem big, important, and scary. We have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. Again, this was written in advance for a kidnapping and not a murder, so they fully expected to have JonBenet in their possession when making the call to arrange for a drop-off of the ransom money. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. The kidnappers had been in the Ramsey house prior to the kidnapping and had seen the amount of John Ramsey's bonus. His pay stubs were left lying around the house, and the bonus amount was on all his pay stubs. Different people working around the house could have easily seen them. Bring an adequate size attaché to the bank was language to make them appear educated. The delivery will be exhausting. That could be because the kidnappers planned on taking JonBenet to a rural area that would be difficult for John to find. I advise you to be rested. Could be because they planned on giving John several different locations to go in case someone was trailing him. They would hope that person would get lost in the process. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence a earlier pickup of your daughter. Notice the words early and earlier were used there 4 different times. This was likely said because if John could get the money quickly, the kidnappers wanted him to get it to them quickly to avoid anyone coming into the picture like the police, etc. It is important to take note of these words. Hence, a earlier delivery, a word that is crossed out, pick up of your daughter. This confirms the fact that JonBenet was originally to be taken, removed from the Ramsey home. After the kidnappers received the ransom money, they intended to deliver her somewhere. It could have been the side of a country road somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The matriarch murderess had some motherly instincts, and even if the whole ordeal ended with JonBenet being killed, she was still concerned about her having a proper burial. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter indicates that the kidnappers had arranged for 2 of the male kidnappers to watch over JonBenet during the kidnapping, while the 2 female kidnappers resumed normal activities to avoid getting caught. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, confirms the group was jealous of the Ramsey wealth and fat cat, John Ramsey. The next several sentences are nothing more than movie talk. The last page of the ransom note indicates the person writing the note was around Patsy Ramsey frequently and was heavily familiar with the language Patsy Ramsey used. The matriarch murderess was envious of Patsy's poised stance in society and wished she was loved by people like Patsy was. She was jealous of Patsy, but also had a high admiration for her. It's up to you, John. Again, is because John was the one who had the money for them. SBTC, possibly. She's by the seller. Now we will look at some peculiar things in the secret letter. If you don't know, the secret letter is a mysterious letter that's been floating around the internet for years, but a lot of people don't really know about it. It says, who killed JonBenet Ramsey? How did she die? Those are the questions most Americans want answered, and I can answer them. So the first thing to note here is, how can this person answer these questions? Why are they one of only 3 people who know the answer? The following should really be questioned. They say in the secret letter, we were actually part of the Ramsey household right up until the day JonBenet died. We, meaning multiple people, right up until the day JonBenet died. As far as I know, the day JonBenet died, it was only the Ramseys in the household. So how was this we were part of the Ramsey household? We were part of the Ramsey household indicates that it's not the Ramseys, it's somebody else. And then it goes on to say that this person took care of JonBenet like their own child. So who is this that took care of JonBenet like their own child? And then they go on to say it's a frightening story with a terrible secret. Well, why is it a terrible secret? And then they go on to say the secret is this: I have no mouth and I must scream. That's right. I have no mouth and I must scream. And they repeat that several times. It's an interesting reference. I have no mouth and I must scream. Could this be linked to the fact that JonBenet had tape over her mouth, yet she could not scream? At least scream and be heard? And then, if you keep going down some after several more sentences, it says, and yet I know who killed JonBenet Ramsey, just as surely as if I had been there. In that dark, I will tell you what happened on that dreadful Christmas night. Why would they know what happened to JonBenet in the wine cellar? And how would they know how it looked, dark and awful? And why were they so certain it happened Christmas night? Then they go on to say that John and Patsy never showed the slightest affection for one another. They never saw them once embrace, hold hands, kiss or hug, or use terms of endearment. It's irrelevant for the writer of this secret letter to mention how often John and Patsy Ramsey kissed and hugged. Patsy was a sickly woman. Many women who have battled severe illnesses don't feel like being touched frequently. It takes a toll on the family, but it doesn't mean they're murderers. Then it goes on to say, in fact, I don't ever think I've been around a married couple who look so uncomfortable together. This secret letter has quite a few references to John and Patsy Ramsey and their marriage and their sex life. But what does this have to do with the murder of JonBenet? Then the writer of the note says, was there anything Patsy could do to keep her from thinking about his penis in her mouth and gagging on it? Well, was there? Patsy appeared desperate. Was there anything she could do about the salty, sour taste of John's penis and the pubic hair that would stick in her teeth? This is some pretty graphic information here, and it offers insight to the mind of the author of this secret letter. One may think they have a perverted mind. Then it goes on. I'm not going to read the entire letter for this part here, but it says, clearly there was more to John's anger than an uncooked meal or an unmade bed. I suspected the real reason behind John's outburst probably had more to do with his uncooked pot roast. One may get the feeling here that the author of this secret letter has fantasized about writing erotic novels or mystery novels, something in that category. It says, I spoke at length about the trouble I thought the Ramsey marriage was experiencing. All marriages have troubles. What marriage wouldn't suffer through bouts with cancer and the death of a child? John Ramsey had lost his older daughter, and he had a hard time dealing with that, and I'm sure that took a toll on the family. And nobody knows what kind of toll cancer takes on the family, except for a family that has gone through that. And then the writer says, I could honestly say that the Ramseys did not appear to be a happily married couple. On the contrary, they seemed held together like lots of other unhappy marriages by their children. Children isn't exactly groundbreaking news. Many couples who are struggling in areas find extra strength to work their problems out because of the children. It's not a big deal and it's quite common. Then the author goes on to say that Patsy could be kind and even thoughtful, but she was one of the strangest people I have ever met. It says, Patsy took me aside and explained that she had gone to her local church, had members of her congregation pray over her, and the next day found that doctors had declared her miraculously cured of stage 4 ovarian cancer. So the author of this secret letter seems to mock Patsy's faith in God. It gives us a peek inside the heart of the writer of the letter. They're pretty ruthless to mock someone that has been through a tremendous amount dealing with cancer. If believing in God and having faith in God and even believing what someone might consider to be strange helped Patsy get to the next step in her recovery, and it was working for her, it's not a big deal either. Then the author goes on to write, Patsy believed her dead stepdaughter's message was true and that the angel sent her cancer into remission, along with the help of the parishioners of her church who had prayed over her. That's the author further mocking Patsy's faith. They go on to say, one of the ways in which Patsy Ramsey would communicate was through handwritten notes. I was left several dozen handwritten notes by Patsy Ramsey. I am quite familiar with her handwriting, and I believe I can recognize it with very little difficulty. This is worth looking into. The author of The Secret Letter makes it clear they are quite familiar with Patsy's handwriting. Someone who is quite familiar with someone's handwriting may be able to replicate it with little ease, especially if they are frequently given notes to read over an extended period of time. Some people were quite good at forging their parents' signatures on notes growing up. So it may have been easy for this person to duplicate or replicate Patsy Ramsey's writing as well. By way of example, they say, Patsy made her letter A's very distinctively, and she would use accents over words like JonBenet and attaché, and often used initialing of words in combination to name just a few of her many unique handwriting characteristics. So the author of The Secret Letter seems to have a very deep insight on Patsy's exact handwriting techniques. They also have some serious and interesting insight on the phrases used in the ransom note. People should take note of that, as this has been a huge mystery regarding the ransom note. The question has been, how would someone know Patsy's handwriting style and language? They go on to say, your big 4-0 birthday was less than a week away. You had dealt with ovarian cancer for years and your beauty queen looks were fading. Miss West Virginia of 1977 had become a middle-aged matron. The author of The Secret Letter seems to be happy that Patsy's beauty queen looks are fading. It has been proven untrue that JonBenet wet the bed night after night, and it is also a solid fact that JonBenet's bed sheets were bone dry the night she was snatched out of her bed. But the author still writes, you love JonBenet, but she was a handful wetting the bed night after night. She was driving you crazy. That's a very untrue statement there. And it's proven to be untrue because all you have to do is look at the pictures of JonBenet's bed yourself. Her bed was literally bone dry the night she was murdered, the day she was murdered, whenever she was murdered. So the author goes on to say, Christmas Day wasn't quiet or peaceful either. There was pressure, lots of pressure, and I wasn't there to smooth out the rough edges for you. So we can see here the author fancies themselves to be some sort of hero and savior for Patsy Ramsey. Sure, it was picture perfect. The author of The Secret Letter may be envious that Patsy's home was picture perfect. And then it goes on to give great details about the Ramsey schedule. You were expected to gather up Burke and JonBenet and have them ready to fly out at daybreak to Michigan, where there was going to be a second Christmas at your lakefront vacation house. John would hire the pilot, but you were the one who had to pack and organize and get the kids dressed. Before that, I missed it. It says there were homes to visit, open houses that had to be dropped in and out of. So the author here appears to have great detail about the Ramsey family schedule and knows a lot about their movement around that time of Christmas. So they say, you were weary that night. Who wouldn't be? John was no help. He did what he always did, swallowed a couple of melatonin capsules and fell into a deep sleep. He wouldn't have heard a cannon go off if it was next to the bed. The author of The Secret Letter seems to be sure that John Ramsey would not awaken no matter what the noise level was in his home. The author mocks Patsy and her looks again, demonstrating possible jealousy for her lifestyle. That's when they go into, you were still wearing the red sweater and black velvet trousers when you put JonBenet to bed Christmas night. Surprisingly, for someone who has 100 dresses and prides herself with never wearing the same outfit twice, you were wearing that same costume when the police arrived the next day. JonBenet wet the bed again that night, didn't she? They talk about taking JonBenet into the bathroom and punishing her for wetting the bed, like the author of The Secret Letter has seen so many times before. If they had seen this so many times before, why wouldn't they report it to the authorities? Also, again, it has never been proven that JonBenet had wet sheets the night or day she was murdered. So everything in there is not true. Except this time there was an accident, wasn't there? You picked up the long black flashlight you brought with you. You swung it first at her crotch and then next at her head. The author of the secret letter seems to give vivid details here about the attack on JonBenet. And what's pretty interesting is we all believe some kind of pervert sexually assaulted JonBenet, but not in the regular way a man might sexually assault a child. So the author of this note makes a statement that the flashlight was swung at JonBenet's crotch first, and then they also make those other sexual references in this letter. I think that kind of gives us an idea of the perversion level of the person writing this note. It's interesting. It's something that should warrant further questioning. Then they go on to say, at first you thought you had knocked her out, but she wasn't breathing, and you felt for a pulse, but there was none. And then it says, well, someone else must have done this, since it certainly couldn't have been you, right? After all, you were always a model parent, right? At least you hoped people thought so. All of those Tom Clancy novels were suddenly flashing through your mind as JonBenet's body lay before you. What would a clever mystery writer have his antagonists do? Think. The author of this secret letter seems to give more exclusive details about JonBenet's state during her attack. They also mock Patsy again for being a good parent. Why? Maybe because the writer of this secret letter was not a good parent. Here in this passage here is also another clue that they dream or had dreams of becoming a popular writer. They sure wouldn't have the villain lie down and take the rap for an accident. A parent could do that. But what if JonBenet was slowly strangled, exotically, with, of all things, a garrote? And then they go on to talk about pulling the cord tight around her neck until it was red. I remember such a cord wrapped in such a way around a box in the basement next to where the body was found. This, out of everything in the secret letter, is probably the most disturbing to me, because the writer of this secret letter is going into how JonBenet was slowly strangled, exotically, with a garrote, and how red her neck was as the cord was being pulled tight. Who would know that? Who would know something like that? Even with all the information on the internet and everything and all the reports and everything, yes, JonBenet had some kind of red mark on her neck, but who would know that JonBenet's neck had the cord pulled tight around it until it was red? That is just crazy detail right there. And then also saying that there was a cord wrapped around the box in the basement next to where the body was found. That again is very descriptive. I mean, the cord could have come from outside the house, anywhere in the house, any kind, it's kind of strange that they say the cord was found wrapped around a box right beside where JonBenet's body was found. And if you look at the pictures of the cord, it absolutely looks like it came off a box because it's flat. It's like a flat white cord. It's not like a circular, I'm missing the word here, but like a circular rope. It's more like a flat cord, almost like a shoestring in a way. So they go on to say, you kept trying to make it an exotic crime scene, didn't you? You even taped your daughter's wrist and her mouth shut, cutting the tape with a small Swiss Army knife that would later be found beside her body the next day. I remember that knife. And then it says you carried JonBenet downstairs and hid her body in the basement inside a small hidden room, the wine room. So a couple things to note here is that the police stated that the knife was found on the counter down the hall and not next to JonBenet's body. Unless Fleet White or John or somebody moved it, put it on that counter. But anyway, the police found it on the counter. And also there's some peculiar language here used. Hid her body in the basement, inside a small hidden room. So that indicates that the author of this note is saying that this room was hidden, that not many people would know about it. We know that the police searched the basement and didn't even realize that room was there. So anyway, they go on to say, you then wrapped her in a favorite white blanket of hers, which you took from the dryer, except her Barbie nightgown was stuck to it because you never did have the sense to throw in a static cling strip with the wash. So you laid the nightie next to her. This is some disturbing information again, because how would the author of this secret letter have such explicit details about the exact state of the crime scene? When John came to the basement and saw JonBenet with Fleet, he quickly grabbed her body, took the tape off her mouth, tried to take the ropes off her wrists, and swiftly rushed her upstairs, throwing the blanket and the cover on the blanket and the nightgown on the ground. So how would anybody know, for one, that it was JonBenet's favorite white blanket, for two, that it just came out of the dryer, and three, that her Barbie nightgown was stuck to it because Patsy didn't use static cling in the wash, four, that the nightie was laid next to her body? How do they know the nightie wasn't laid on top of the blanket? It's interesting that they're saying these things, because who would know these things? What to do next, they say. And then they go on to talk about the ransom note and how all the language in the ransom note was Patsy's, and that they could hear Patsy's voice in the note. This passage here is also telling about the author of this secret letter. They appear to have intense knowledge about the language and phrases used in the Ramsey household and the ransom note. They let you know that they are familiar with Patsy's voice in the wording she used. They go on and give a greatly detailed description of how these things possibly ended up in the ransom letter. They say the word hints, for example, was in your Christmas cards and letters, and a word you like to use in conversation. The phrase, use that good Southern common sense, is what you kidded John about, since he was anything but Southern, having been born and raised in Michigan. The phrase fat cat is what your mother Nedra used to call you after you and John became rich. The ransom demand asked the money to be put in an attaché with a proper accent mark over the last E in attaché. I can't believe anyone reads this and does not pay attention to it. It drives me crazy. They're always looking at the ransom note like, where did all these phrases and stuff come from? They sound like Patsy's. And yet this secret letter is out here and it's literally giving you word by word and detail by detail how these things ended up in the ransom letter and why they ended up in the ransom note. It's crazy people haven't paid attention to this. And then they go on to say, I remember how careful you always were to put the proper accent mark over the E in the second syllable of JonBenet's name. The ransom note even ended with the initials SBTC. Do you remember how fond you were of using initials as abbreviations for all sorts of expressions? Also acknowledging they have deep, deep knowledge of Patsy Ramsey's movements, the way she writes, the way she speaks, the way she handles things. They have some very explicit detail again here.